So I think let's just go ahead and get started. God, I really hope that this slideshow works the way it's supposed to. Also, if you can see my little activate Windows thing in the corner, sorry. I don't want to give Windows money. So excuse me, I'm gonna take a sip of water. Hydrate or dihydrate. Alright, let's get going. Hello everyone, and welcome to the panel No Place Like Home on Hearthomes. I'm your lovely host Rani, and more on me and why I introduced this panel in a different language in a second. And I am so glad to have you all here with me. So, I should check if we're recording first. That's a thing I should check. I should have asked that. Are we recording? Okay, perfect. I was like, I should have asked that before I started. Alright. So, without further ado, with that cleared up, what is this panel about? Today we are going to be talking about Hearthomes, what they are, what it's like to have one, and some common experiences, what counts as a Hearthome, some similar identities, and how to differentiate them, your mileage may vary, some strategies for engaging with a Hearthome, and some strategies for coping with what I like to call the yearning TM. This panel will also have a Q&A section at the end, and I will post the script at that point. I encourage you to post questions in panel questions, not the regular panel chat, as you come up with them, or to hold them until the end, your choice. Please be advised that if you post your questions in the normal panel chat, I will almost certainly not be answering them unless, well, actually, I won't be seeing chat, so unless they're very quick clarification doesn't apply. So, I won't see them if you put them in the normal panel chat when I'm doing the Q&A section. They need to go in panel questions. Who's the guy talking? I'm Rani, aka Dragonheart, Dragon, and in not-be-speaking communities, Thrakon. I forgot to put my pronouns in this slide, but they are they, them, it, its, and dre, drem, dris, drem, self. As you might expect, I have a Hearthome, Pandora, or Ewa Aveng by its not-be name, from James Cameron's Avatar, the blue one, not the Airbender one, which may explain the opening sentence being in not-be. I'm also a dragon, a Damien, a paladin/guardian archetype, and the host of a small plural system. I've been awakened to my Hearthome since 2021, and awakened to my Draconity, which was my first Alter-Human awakening, and marks my first forays into the community, since 2017. What I am not is the coiner of any of these words, and as such, my voice is just one of many. Take my words with a grain of salt, as you always should. I'm just ignore the cat feeder going off in the background. I'm just a Hearthome haver who wants the word to become more well-known because I genuinely believe that Hearthomes are one of the most common alter-human identities, despite how rarely the word is used, although I will say I've seen it used a lot more at OtherCon this year than anywhere ever before, which is really exciting for me. Which brings us to our first question. What is a Hearthome exactly? At its most basic, a Hearthome can be defined as a place, world, or setting, whether fictional or real, that feels like home to you, or like you belong there, typically despite never having lived or spent a significant amount of time there. People who have a Hearthome, or the state of having a Hearthome, are both sometimes referred to as hearthic. Others prefer just sticking to Hearthome. I'm one of these people for entirely personal preference reasons. For example, if one's Hearthome is Nevada, one might be called Nevada Hearthic. If it is Faerun, one might be called Faerun Hearthic. This is sometimes considered to be part of the other-hearted umbrella, as it's sometimes described as being other-hearted with a place instead of a character or creature, but personally, I don't necessarily consider Hearthomes a subset of other-heartedness so much as their own related but distinct label. Both ways of looking at it are equally valid categorizations. Hearthomes often occur concurrently with other alter-human types, especially kin types, which I believe is a large part of why it's such an unknown label, despite being so commonly described as an experience. However, it can also exist independently for many reasons, such as past lives. If you lived a life in that place, it may still ring as home to you, in much the same way that if you lived a life as a species, that species might still ring as you to your mind. Psychological desires or connections. Sometimes a fictional setting or a real place can fulfill deep-set desires that we have and feel like home because of it. Whether it be a love for the climate, or a native species drawing you to a biome, or a longing for a specific type of magic drawing you to a world where that magic is commonplace, hearthomes can happen simply because they fulfill something that you're looking for, something that's deeply important to you. Being from a piece of media that's very important to you, especially if it was important to you growing up. Several people with hearthomes that I've met have described their hearthomes as having formed because the media the world or place was from was a formative piece of media for them, and thus its setting became deeply familiar and important to them. A hearthome may be a hearthome because it was created by the person who holds it in that regard, and thus is deeply familiar and important to them. Or it may have been even created just to be a hearthome. And, of course, just because, which is kind of my personal experience. I couldn't tell you why I have a hearthome, I just do, and that's that on that. There's probably several aspects to it, but I ultimately just don't know, and I'm okay with that. Oh, and there's the Hearthic flag, which I forgot to put in a bullet point for. There's the image credit. I was gonna say, there should be an image credit in there somewhere. Weird. There it is. A little on the history of the term. I'll admit openly, I have had trouble finding much information on this, partially because I admit that my preparation for this panel ended up a little rushed, for reasons entirely my own fault. But also partially because the research I was able to do really didn't turn up very much. As far as I can tell, the term originated in the Alt-H Discord server in 2016, suggested in a community discussion by Discord user Vagabond Worm. It was then presented on the Alt-H blog in a post linked here, well, not linked, referenced, which discusses that in a little more detail. The term Hearthic was then coined in 2021 on Tumblr by Tumblr user Astrophelian, complete with a flag and symbol, which, oh, that's where I put my reference to it. Oops, it was on the wrong slide. Good job, me. If you have any more information on the history of this term, please tell me. I really hope that there's some discussion going on in the chat I can't see. I want to know more about this. But for now, what does having a hearthome really feel like? What are some of the common experiences? For one, homesickness. Longing for and missing the place in question, even if you've never lived there. It can be strange to feel a sense of missing somewhere that you've never been, but at least in my experience, it is a distinct feeling. It's not just wanting something. It feels more like looking back at a place that was beloved in childhood, longing for what once was, even if in reality it never was. At least for me. There's a specific word here that is sometimes used, hiraeth, which I believe I've got the pronunciation on correct. It used to be a popular word in the otherkin community, being a Welsh word, often translated to English as a profound sense of longing for something you can never return to, but there's debate over whether it's inaccurate and appropriative to use it to refer to anything that applies to, and as such it fell out of favor several years ago. Many point out that it can simply be translated to longing, however, some feel it should only be applied specifically to the Welsh people about their homeland, given that that's often its historic context. There's been debate and back and forth on this. Personally, I don't have strong opinions on it because I've seen very little consensus that there seems to be among Welsh speakers from what discussions I've found. For one example, see this discussion that is referenced on the R-Whale subreddit, where there seem to be roughly equal numbers of people holding each of these opinions. You may also experience nimata and or memories of your heart home and things relating to it. For those unfamiliar, nima, plural nimata, is a word meaning innate knowledge, coined by Tumblr user Asterians, Poppy, to fill a linguistic gap wherein memory doesn't always work for altered human identities. Lost my place for a second. Especially those that don't believe their altered humanity stems from a past life. In short, a nema is a piece of knowledge that you, quote, just know about, in this case, your heart home, not because you necessarily have a memory of an event tied to it, it's simply because you know it to be true. In the case of fictional places, nemata can be a little challenging to distinguish from mere headcanons, but in my experience, it's mostly a question of both how instinctively they come to you and how powerful they are. The things I'm certain I can call nemata are things that feel viscerally wrong to contradict, even if canon contradicts them. Additionally, people with a heart home might feel a desire to move or live there, whether or not it's feasible to actually do so. This isn't guaranteed, but it naturally follows that if a place feels like home to you, you may well have a desire to live there. And finally, the classic feeling of simply feeling right about it in a way that I usually give a capital R. There's a feeling of relief and comfort when engaging with my heart home. Something about it that just settles into my chest and feels right in a way that's hard to describe. It's a place I belong, and my heart knows that. Allow me to talk a little more about my personal experiences to provide an example. As I've mentioned, my heart home is Pandora, or Ewa Evang by its Napi name, which I tend to prefer using. I first watched Avatar when I was quite young, too young to really remember it. My childhood memory is not good. But I know I was obsessed with it from the start because I immediately took some ideas from it to incorporate into my own world-building projects at the time. Primarily Tsahelu, the bond, the neural link that Pandoran creatures can form with each other to allow instantaneous mental communication. It lived kind of in the back of my mind as a distant interest for a long time, but eventually I rewatched the movie and remembered how much I love its world. Avatar is a franchise that definitely has its problems, but it generally is trying its best, and the world of Ewa Evang is... well, it's everything to me. I long for Ewa Evang in much the same way I long for my wings and flight. I miss it, almost, and all of its creatures. Looking at images and videos of it makes my heart swell. I can be brought to tears watching certain clips of the first movie in particular, where it spent a lot of time just exploring and reveling in Ewa Evang's beauty. I spent a while trying to figure out if I had a kin type or heart type from that world, and if that was why it felt so familiar. But I kept running into the issue that I didn't have a particular draw to any specific species or even aspect of the planet. Everything was equally right, equally home, equally missed. Eventually, I came across the word heart home, and eventually I decided to adopt it. Over time, I've been able to explore this more, and anything that allows me to immerse myself in Ewa Evang for a while truly does feel like coming home. Frontiers of Pandora came out in December 2023, and it did not disappoint. The game has many flaws and weak points, but much of this comes from the fact that the developers clearly focused very hard on making the world as immersive and detailed as they could, and that's really what I wanted out of it. I nearly cried multiple times in the first 30 minutes of escaping out of the RDA facility the game starts in into the world of Ewa Evang. I think it took me 40 at least to finally get around to actually continuing the plot, because I was too busy running around and seeing what I could climb and explore. And gods, this game lets you climb. It really makes you feel the strength and grace of the Nut that you're playing as, which is really everything I wanted out of it. Feeling a part of that world. Earlier this year, I also got to finally visit Mo'ara Valley, the park in Disney World, Florida, which contains a piece of Ewa Eveng on Earth as best they can. Gods, there are flaws, but they did as good a job as they possibly could have, considering they're working within the restraints of, reality and Earth's gravity. Again, I almost cried just walking in, and I did break down sobbing over Flight of Passage, the ride where you get to ride on Ikran's back. A more immersive ride than I could possibly have hoped, even if, yes, there's no way it could ever exist on the real Ewa Eveng for multiple reasons. It's hard to describe the feeling of finally getting to come home and not just see and hear, but smell and feel it all around you. I'm not sure I have the words. My heart sings, my bones fill with relief and peace. Thom, the Na'vi word for peace, well-being, happiness, ironically kind of works better than the English here. In all forms of engaging with my heart home, though, there's a sense of peace and comfort that fills me completely when I can immerse myself in Ewa Eveng. Whether it's watching the movies, playing Frontiers, listening to soundscapes on YouTube, writing or drawing my own creations, or even just speaking the Na'vi language with other people. It's a connection that brings me comfort. Just like returning home after a long time away. Well, with explanations and examples out of the way, let's get into some details and discussion. What counts as a heart home for any given value of counting? There's some room for debate surrounding what exactly can qualify as a heart home, especially with the ways it's often been defined in the past. So, let's dig into some of the pieces of how it's often defined, and why I put qualifiers into them when they appear in my definition. First, the qualification that you've never lived or spent much time there. This is commonly included in the definition of heart home, but there's room to raise a few questions. For example, what if your heart home is a real place and you end up moving there? Does it stop being a heart home because you now live there? I don't think it necessarily should. And what if you used to live there but don't or can't anymore, especially if you lived there only when you were very young, maybe too young to consciously remember it? What if the place has been destroyed and you physically can't go back? Do these things count as heart homes? I think they should, if the term feels right to someone. There's gray area in all of these to be questioned. In all of these cases, if the feelings toward the place haven't changed, and if the individual experience in them feels heart home to be a useful term to describe them, I don't see a reason to exclude them. Second, can a heart home only be a physical place? It's uncommon, and usually not accounted for in how people define heart home, but I have seen people describe heart homes that aren't physical places, such as being internet hearthic. It's unorthodox, to be sure, but again, I don't see a reason to exclude it. After all, what else would one call it? One could perhaps simply lump it into internet hearted, but I can see where a distinction might lie. That specific feeling of this is home, rather than any other variation of connection that might fall into heartedness. More on that later. I haven't personally seen someone describe any of these experiences, but I'd also like to propose other planes of existence, such as the astral, mindscapes, and headspaces, as all potential places a heart home could crop up. Maybe a system member feels more comfortable and at home with the headspace environment than any external one. Maybe an astral traveler encounters or builds a realm that feels powerfully like home to them. Should these places not count, just because they're not tangible places? Are not the classic fictional heart homes also intangible in a very similar way? I don't see any reason the word heart home couldn't apply to these, especially for places discovered rather than built. Earlier during this other con, another form of atypical heart home came up, namely a time period as a heart home, or an Earth, but so long ago that it's an entirely different place. This came up in reference to Archaeosapiens, meaning that my first instinct was to apply it to a prehistoric Earth. but I would propose that it could just as easily apply to a more recent time period. Ancient Egypt, medieval Europe, 1920s America. Time can be just as big a factor in defining a place as space is. The very spot where I'm sitting was very different even just 100 years ago. I'd also like to touch on the term archaeopothos here, defined as the experience of longing, yearning, or sorrow pertaining to an individual's roots in an ancient time and place. Missing and longing for a place and time long gone, in a way very similar to homesickness for a heart home. If you want to learn more about Archaeopothos and Archaeosapiens, I highly suggest checking out the Archaeosapiens panel from earlier this con. I'll be linking the script in my references. Third, is a heart home still a heart home if it's only present because of another identity, such as a Theriotype's habitat? In my opinion, of course it is. The only reason it's often not labeled as a heart home is because it's kind of assumed to be part of the non-human and fiction-kin experiences in particular. If you're a wolf, of course you long for a wolf's native habitat. If you're a Na'vi, of course you miss Ewa'ebeng. Whether or not your feelings toward the place are strong enough to warrant their own label is up to you. For many, I suspect it's easy enough to just consider it part of the package with the identity it's coming from. However, I would point out something I've never really heard talked about. It's very possible for a species identity, heart type, or other alter-human identity to come from a heart home, rather than vice versa. Who's to say that one doesn't feel like an otter because they love the river so much that they had to be something that belongs there? Or that one didn't connect to Pernese dragons as a heart type because Pern felt like home and the dragons are a major feature of it? As a personal example, I've honestly started to consider forming a Na'vi link type, specifically in order to connect with my heart home further and cope with some of the feelings I have toward the Na'vi because of my heart home. A lot of Avatar media focuses on the Na'vi specifically for obvious reasons. As a result, a lot of my heart home feelings get attached to them and their culture, simply because it's one of the things we have the most detail on. I'm not a Na'vi, but I've started considering becoming one purely because of that, to help it fit better, to feel more a part of Ewa'ebeng, and to strengthen that connection into its own thing so that it stops feeling a little strange for it to be such a major focus. Following up what counts as a heart home exactly, let's talk about some similar identities for a minute, and how to tell them apart. First off, concept kin or place kin, identifying as the place in question. Whether one uses concept kin or place kin is kind of a personal distinction. In many cases, the two overlap. Someone who identifies as the forest as a biome, for example, could be considered either or both. Definition-wise, the distinction seems like it should be simple. Place kin are the place in question, whereas someone with a heart home feels like they should be there. Experience-wise, however, I have to imagine this can be a little harder to parse out. Placekin may describe looking at the place they identify as and seeing themselves, whereas a heart home is a place that it feels like you belong. They may experience shifts of being that place, which isn't something I would expect from a heart home, although I suppose it's not impossible. For placekin, I would expect the sentence "I am" the place in question to feel instinctively right. For a heart home, I wouldn't. A kin type is a place you see yourself as. A heart home is a place you see yourself in. What about being concept-hearted or place-hearted? Identifying with, but not as, the place in question. This one's really subjective, to be honest. After all, heart homes are sometimes defined as being hearted, but with a place instead of a person or thing. A lot of which one you choose to use is up to what makes more sense to you. I would personally make the distinction that being place-hearted doesn't necessarily mean it feels like home, but rather that there's any kind of connection there, and I've seen some place-hearted people make the same distinction. Realistically, however, that distinction is extremely subjective. It is ultimately up to what works best for you. And finally, being kin-hearted or having another strong connection to, I apologize for my mother's cell phone ringtone, It is, because I know the question's being asked in chat right now without looking, it is a screech owl, not a person screaming. Oh, where was I? Being kin-hearted or having another strong connection to a creature, person, etc. that exists in that place. The easiest distinction to make is that fiction kin, even non-canon fiction kin, will typically have a specific life and place that they, quote, should fit into within their heart home, whereas a standalone heart home often lacks this. A heart home alone probably won't give you a sense of, I should have this specific home at this workplace, and I remember and miss specific people. These things are much more likely to come from a ficta type, even a non-canon one. Heart types. I missed my bullet point, sorry. Heart types, stereotypes, etc. may or may not have that, but will typically be attached primarily to one or two specific features, species, people, etc. within the heart home, rather than the entire thing. As I said, this was a big part of figuring out my own heart home. I kept trying to find a kin type or heart type from Ewa Eveng, and it kept not working, because there is no one part of Ewa Eveng I gravitate to more than any others. It's all home to me. In all of these, remember, your mileage may vary. It ultimately comes down to what you, and to what feels right, works best, and makes the most sense for you. Labels exist to serve experiences, not to dictate them. So, you figured out you have a heart home. Happy awakening! What's next? How do you handle it? Having a heart home isn't a bad thing, obviously, but it can undeniably inflict some homesickness and difficulties of that sort. My personal advice is to strike a balance between embracing and expressing your connection to your heart home versus preventing yourself from dying of the yearning. So, how do you express it in your life? Media and research. If your heart home is fictional, engage with the media it's from. Whether it's fictional or real, go wiki diving, read people's thoughts on it, and generally go learn about it. Learn about the animals and plants that live there, learn about the natural and geologic history of the place. Watch movies set there or documentaries about the place. Learning about these things can help you feel connected to the place and can be a source of both interest and enjoyment. Decor. Wall hangings, plants, real or otherwise, and decorative items to make your home space feel more like your heart home. I've got several Ikran toys hung up in my living room, and I've seriously thought about turning one of the rooms in my house into an Ewa Evengtiep, a little Pandora, although I've never committed. Put up photos and paintings of the place, and the wildlife that lives there. Try keeping plants that live there, or that resemble the plants that do. Get furniture items, pillows, throws, etc. that create the aesthetic and atmosphere of the place. There's a lot you can do when it comes to decoration. Scents, candles, incense, air fresheners, perfumes, etc. Scent is a big factor in memory, and is linked closely to emotion. It can be a good way to feel more at home and to comfort yourself. My personal recommendation. Excuse me, sir. Do you mind? Sorry, there's a chickadee on my windowsill pecking at my window. Sir, I am doing a panel. Oh yeah, now you see him. Okay, well, we're gonna ignore that. Sorry, wildlife waits for no man. And now the cat's gonna be rattling at the window. Stop it. Go back to your couch. Go back to sleep. Oi. My personal recommendation. Check out Etsy and indie candle makers. Go Google fictional world scented candles and you'll find a handful of people who make them specifically for that. Etsy even has people who will custom blend scented candles for you. Go nuts. Sounds. Music, immersive soundscapes, etc. can be played anywhere and anytime, as long as you've got headphones. Do not be playing music and sounds out loud in public space. Do not be that person. I see you. And soundscapes can really help you feel at home. Again, my personal recommendations include mynoise.net, which has textured white noise generators of a million types that you can customize the levels on. I like to open up several tabs of these to overlap them. And tabletopaudio.com, which has soundscapes intended for tabletop gaming in various genres. You can also hit up YouTube for soundscapes, although your mileage may vary for less popular fictional media in particular. Desktop wallpapers. It sounds a little silly, but just setting your desktop wallpaper to one or more images of your Hearthome can be surprisingly nice day to day. Video games. If your Hearthome comes from or is directly depicted in a video game, this is easy. For me, Frontiers of Pandora has been one of the best things to happen to me. Has been one of the best things to happen to me in a long time. However, even if your Hearthome isn't directly depicted in a video game, you may still be able to find games that depict similar worlds and environments, which will let you explore and engage with them, even indirectly. I'm doing a panel, shush. No respect in this house. Learn about and engage with language and culture as applicable and appropriate. If your Hearthome is inhabited by people, human or otherwise, learn about them. Maybe learn their language or engage with aspects of their culture if you can. Obviously, this isn't always going to be feasible, especially with real-world places. I want to be very clear about the as-appropriate part. I am not encouraging trying to claim to be part of a real-world culture that you're not part of, or worse, putting it on as a costume and not treating it with the respect that the real people you're learning about deserve. I am encouraging cultural exchange, though. Learn about the culture there. Talk to the people who live there if you can. Come to it with an open mind and with an effort to set aside the lens of your own culture. Learn about their culture, their language, their beliefs, their food. Food is a fantastic way to participate in cultural exchange. The people who live in a place, especially those indigenous to that place, will probably have a strong connection to the land there and understand it in ways you don't. Learn from them if they're willing to teach. This carries less concern with fictional Hearthomes, but even then, try to hold on to a bit of awareness about the real-world cultures that any fictional peoples of your Hearthome are probably based on, especially those that are often stereotyped, misrepresented, and generally treated disrespectfully by fictional interpretations of them. Even with fictional Hearthomes, however, the cultures and people there can be a way to connect to the land they're tied to. Learning the Na'vi language, for instance, has been a real joy for me. And even if I don't have anyone to speak it with day to day, it's still been good for me. It's helped me connect to my Hearthome and also taught me things about my own language. Go learn a language. Come learn Na'vi with us. Anyway, my kelluthral.org plug aside. Mindscapes and headspaces can be built to resemble your Hearthomes. You can visit whenever you like, especially if you're good at or want to get better at visualization. I am admittedly not an expert in this, so I'm afraid I can't give much detail on how to approach doing that. But I know there are many good guides to creating headspaces out there, both for singlets and plural systems, and often the advice is very similar regardless. And finally, visit if you can. Hell, you can even make plans to move there if you want. If your Hearthome is physically reachable for you, please take the opportunity to visit it if you can. Do it for those of us who will never be able to, and do it for yourself. You won't regret it. If the comparison between watching the movies and being in immersive recreations of Ewa Aveng is anything to go by, there's nothing like the real thing. And on the flip side, how do you avoid dying of the yearning? Here's my maybe controversial take for the day. Fostering a love for the place you live in now as well is crucial to your mental health, especially if you have a Hearthome that you're homesick for. You cannot live your life only yearning for a place you can't go to or can't live long term. I know it may sound counterintuitive, but sometimes the best way to cope with the homesickness is to engage with your current home and ground yourself in it. Sometimes engaging with your Hearthome only makes the homesickness worse. Sometimes the closest I can get to Ewa Aveng only makes my chest ache more for it, and only reminds me I'll never actually be there. I'll always be just looking through the window glass at it. On days like that, I find that the best thing is to consciously turn my attention to the here and now, the world and home I'm currently in, and intentionally re-find the beauty in that. So, go places and just explore if you can. Wander around a park or your city block or what have you, and take the time to really notice the details. Take lunch out. One moment. Oops. There we go. Sorry. We're back. Oops. I accidentally exited out of this. No. Put it back. Put it back. Take lunch outside sometime, and eat outside without having a phone or book to distract you, just watching the world around you. I've started doing this regularly when it's not too hot to do so. August! And it's done me wonders. Learn about your local animals and plants, especially the little ones, the ones no one notices. You have dozens of species of small birds native to your area if you only take the time to look, I promise. And it can be really cool and rewarding to take the time to notice and learn to identify them. It reminds you there's life everywhere. I'm not very familiar with equivalents outside of the USA, I'm afraid, but if you're in the USA, your state's Fish and Wildlife Department almost certainly has web pages entirely dedicated to your native species. Go look sometime. Spend time around plants whenever you can, especially if your heart home is an outdoor biome, but even if it's not, forgive me, I keep accidentally hitting things. Even if it's just houseplants, being around plants is good for you. We've done multiple studies on this. People just do better mentally when they get some time around living green plants. Sit in the grass for a bit, it's good for you. Overall, just take the time to really notice the world around you and find the beauty in it. Find something you can love in your current home surroundings and grab onto it. Don't let the things that you miss and long for make you forget that there are things to love here as well. In conclusion, a quick recap of the major points. A heart home is a place, real or fictional, that feels like home to you, whatever that may mean to you. Heart homes can exist alongside other alter-human identities or as their own standalone identity. And the ways to help cope with having a heart home include engaging with media depicting it in one way or another, learning about your heart home and the people and creatures that live there, changing your current environment to mimic your heart home, and simultaneously engaging with your current home and grounding yourself in that. Thank you for coming! I appreciate all of your time. Here you see my list of references, which is also in the script. And again, I will post the script for this panel in chat now, and it will be available, well, in a minute, and it will be available on my blog at adragonsjournal.tumblr.com shortly after this panel ends. Assuming I don't forget to post it for a week, which is also a possibility. Here are my image credits as well. I now open the Q&A section of this panel. If you have questions, now's the time to ask. Please make sure to put questions in the panel questions channel, not in the general panel chat. I will not answer them if they're in the general panel chat. Alright, let me go grab that link. Maybe if my computer doesn't flip out on me. Uh-oh, that's not good. Hello? Well, I'm glad you didn't do this while I was talking, sweetheart. Huh. Excuse me, she's having a moment. I'll be with you in a second. I hope you guys can still hear me. There we go. There you go, love. You can do it, I promise. You're gonna live. Maybe not. There we go. Yay, I'm free. I tried to tab out without without closing the view, and it didn't like it. Let me get real quick my link before I... Well, this is great. My computer is loving to not respond. I'm gonna flip over to mobile so that I... Can you guys still hear me at least? Oh, dear. It figured itself out. Never mind. Alright. Rani, are you a dragon from Pandora? I am not. I am not here. These are separate entities. How do you cope with the fact that your heart home exists on Earth but would not be a safe place for you to live? That's a tough one, and honestly, my advice is the same as for those of us who just can't go. Try to connect with it where you can, and try to connect with the place that you are, or a place that's closer, but, like, not necessarily geographically closer, but closer in climate, closer in whatever draws you to that heart home, but is safe for you to live in. I hope that made sense. I don't know if I have more specific advice than was in that last couple of slides. How do you feel about Pandora being recreated? I think I answered that. I assume they help with the yearning, but can't they also make it worse? Yes. Honestly, for me personally, this is probably something that varies from individual to individual. For me personally, the positives far outweigh the negatives. By the way, we just got it announced that they're making a Pandora Land in California, Disneyland as well, which is much, much closer to me, and which I have family that lives right next to it, and I am so excited that I'll actually be able to visit more than, like, once a decade. How does having a heart home relate to having a past life in that place? I've just been calling it my home world. I've lived there most of my life, and it's still very much home to me. I'm not sure I understand the question. A past life can cause a heart home. I'm not sure I understand the question. If you have a clarification. My answer is yes, having a past life can call it a heart home. Understandable if you just choose to call it your home world. Also understandable if you prefer the term heart home. If you have a more specific question, please feel free to post a clarification now, I suppose. Do you think that a potential heart home would be considered such if, for example, it looks like your own original home and thus gives you the same feelings? Or would that be something like a para-heart home, connection to the environment only, as opposed to the other aspects that also make something home? Huh. That's an interesting question. Huh. I think you could call it a heart home. I have never thought about the idea of a para-heart home. I guess you could call it that. It would fall into, if it evokes heart home feelings, it qualifies as a heart home. It just has a somewhat unusual reason for being a heart home, I guess. But, yeah, no, paratype would be, or some variant on paratype, such as para-heart home, which is a mouthful. I might have to chew on that one and think about... I could easily see someone coining a term specifically for that, because you're right, that is kind of more paratype than heart home. Can a heart home stop feeling like a heart home? I wouldn't disagree. I wouldn't say it can't. Identity is fluid a lot of the time, and it's not something we talk about a lot. The fact that something that you are, an identity that you hold, can change and can disappear, but it can. And that doesn't mean it wasn't real to you at the time, it doesn't mean it wasn't important. It just means that we change over time as people. How do I want to define place in relation to Hearthomes? Does your mom's kitchen count as a place? Is the entire universe a place? That's a fun question. I've never seen something as specific as a room or a, type of room, but I could easily see it counting. For example, I don't often see people whose Hearthomes are as broad as mine. I usually see Hearthomes that are a biome or a town, a fictional town. It's not terribly often that I see, this entire planet which has many different various biomes. It's not a Star Wars planet where the whole thing is one monobiome, but the whole thing is home to me. I would consider something that specific Hearthome if the word works for you, because it is a place, and I don't see a reason to exclude it, if that makes sense. What if you made a copy of your Hearthome within your headspace and make that your Hearthome? That's kind of what I was talking about when I mentioned, mindscapes and headspaces as a potential way to help cope. I guess it's up to you whether you consider that your actual Hearthome, or if you consider that to be just a copy, just a way to visit. If you feel so connected to Pandora but not any particular place, do you feel connected to Awa? Oh boy, I could, we only have about 17 minutes left in this panel, so I won't get into depth about this because I will use the entire 17 minutes talking about Awa if I get started. Yes, I do. I have entire essays on this. Awa is... How do I make this short? Awa, I think, is a large part of the reason that I feel so connected to Pandora. I am mildly obsessed with the idea of being able to connect to someone that directly, that intimately. And it's the idea of tangible connection between everything. Tangible connection, not intangible as we have here, is a lot to me. So yes, those things are absolutely linked for me. I am happy to go dig up a couple of my write-ins on the topic if you would like me to. Please feel free to DM me if I don't do that. Question: if someone has a Hearthome feeling from more than one place that has similar aesthetics, are they really separate Hearthomes, or just a single Hearthome that has features these places hit? For example, for me it's the forest on Ferngully and the biome on Pandora from the first movie, but both are lush rainforest or rainforest vibes. Again, I think that's going to come down to personal what works for you. For me, if that were my experience, I would start thinking about, okay, is it every lush rainforest, lush jungle that hits that feeling for me, or is it just these two? And what is it exactly about these two that hits? Because if you start looking at other things and it hits every time, if it's say the biome example, if you start looking at other examples of that biome and it hits every time, it's probably the biome itself that is the Hearthome. But if it's just those two, it may just be a coincidence, or it may be a very specific type. It may be the specific lush rainforest that has semi-magic vibes. Pandora is, for the most part, very scientific, but also it's not. Hopefully that makes sense. I feel like I'm rambling a little. What if you have a Hearthome or a place for media owned by problematic people, such as the world or Harry Potter or things from that nature? I know that pirating is a way to work around supporting people like that. I need to slow down. But in terms of engaging with those worlds, it can be difficult to morally indulge in those things when the people who own them can be negative. I'm gonna be real with you. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. You probably didn't choose to have the Hearthome. Even if you did, having a connection to a piece of media is not the same as financially supporting the people who made that media. There is a whole conversation to be had here about morality. For me, comes down to harm done. If you're not doing harm, then there's not a problem. And you are not doing harm to anyone by... Sorry for the background noise. You are not doing harm to anyone by merely having a Hearthome, existing with a Hearthome. I know that it can be kind of difficult to deal with it, but it's a little bit like... I'm gonna pause for a second. Because I know the sink is loud. There we go. Sink's off. It's a little bit like being quote-unquote problematic fictionkin, and Goratrix of the Draconic Wizard Workshop did an excellent panel on that, I believe it was last OtherCon, that I really recommend, because while that was aimed at fictionkin and fictives specifically, actually I think it was aimed especially at fictives, I think a lot of the advice there would probably apply. You're not doing anything wrong by existing. You're not doing anything wrong by having a Hearthome. There's a reason that these things became popular. I'm gonna stop rambling about this. Hopefully that helped. What about archetypes? For example, someone being a cowboy archetype, would they be able to call the Wild West a Hearthome for themselves? Yeah, I don't see any reason why not. I also definitely meant to bring that up when I talked about Hearthomes as... Okay, I'm back, sorry. Thank you for the link to the panel I was talking about. Where was I? Archetypes. I definitely meant to mention archetypes specifically when it came to, like, especially a time period as a Hearthome. I definitely meant to mention archetypes. I put that section in this morning, so, oops. Yes, that can absolutely be linked. Why not? Is it possible to have more than one Hearthome? Yeah, why not? Why not? Is there a word for when you yearn more for a community than a physical space? I don't know of one. You could maybe fit it into Hearthome, you could maybe not. You might be looking at coining territory there. Your example, Pandora, some biomes that are inspired by real-world places like the Amazon rainforest. Have you ever considered visiting the real places? So, yes and no. Sorry, my brain shut down. I need to restart it. Yes and no. There is the fact of... yes, they do sometimes evoke those emotions, and at once it... Okay, so I live in the Pacific Northwest. In Frontiers of Pandora, there's actually a section, there's a biome in there that is blatantly based off of the Pacific Northwest, and I do love it. And I find that they tend to be similar but separate, and that I don't know what the difference is. I honestly don't. They tend to be similar but separate. They're not identical. Are there any ways you could find out if something is your hearthome? How did I not talk about that? Or, wait, hang on, I skipped one, sorry. Do you know any Discord servers that are specifically for hearthomes? I don't. I was actually going to ask at the end of this panel, if anyone's interested in that. I don't know that I want to commit to making that yet, but I kind of do. I don't know of any yet. If anyone has any, please pop them into chat. Are there any ways you can find out if something is your hearthome? I don't know how I didn't talk about that. I would say it's probably it's very much like questioning any other role for human identity. It's very much like looking at studying the feelings that thing evokes in you, and I advise writing things down. Journal things. Journal your experiences. Journal your feelings. Think about how important it is to you versus how important other things are to you. And when in doubt, try on the label. See if it fits. You can always drop it later. Can your hearthome be a song or a concept? My instinct is to say no. My second instinct is to go stop. Think about that. My instinct is to say no because I don't know how one would relate to those things in that way. I would be very interested to read someone's thoughts who does relate to those things in that way, though. Write me an essay on my desk by Monday. This is a joke. Do you have any ideas on how to create a hearthome? Any other world-building project? Like any other world-building project, just specifically, what do you want out of it? What do you want out of it? And go from there, build around there. How do you deal with being otherkin? Different panel. I recommend that you ask that in Alter Humanity. I'm running out of time. Are we backed up against another panel? I forget. I don't think so. Better? We do not appear to be backed up against another panel, unless I can't read the schedule, which is possible, but I'm going to try and skim through this. We are just about out of time. What are your thoughts on hearthomes likely due to human-based trauma or lack of experiences? I'm going to be honest, I'm not interested in discriminating. Generally speaking, I am not interested in discriminating identities based on where they come from. If that's where it comes from, and it works for you, then great, I want to hear about it. And I think I am probably just about out of time. I'm gonna stop submitting questions. Stop submitting questions. There's one more that I missed. Where is it? Where is it? Can the concept of being around specific people be a hearthome? Again, I don't instinctively have a good grasp on what that would mean. I would love to read some writing on that, though. I would do whatever you want forever, and also write about it and tell us about it. Explain it, and see if it works for you. And if it works for you, then talk about it, and I want to read it. Treehouse, you have an excellent point about, the AWA being part of the disconnect. That it probably is part of it. Alright, we are at 1 o'clock. I'm gonna go ahead and call it. If you have more questions, please feel free to DM me. I love talking. I love talking to people about things. So, if you have questions, if you want to discuss things, if you have a Discord server for Hearthomes, please feel free to hit me up. My DMs are open. And, I believe I will head out and let y'all get back to the con.